I believe the Africans themselves will realize at some stage that it's better to maintain relations with Europe than to have trade or even financial ties with groups like Wagner.
Wagner mercenaries portray themselves as friends and saviors, at least in images on Telegram. They now call themselves the Africa Corps and report directly to the Kremlin. So what's the difference between these mercenaries and prior military missions led by the West or the United Nations? How do the Russians see it?
Those people didn't come here to fight a war and die. But a Wagner fighter knows he's going to war. He doesn't expect to get double or triple his normal salary just to sleep in Africa.
Reports of arbitrary attacks on civilians are mounting. Collective punishments handed out to entire communities if they're suspected of harboring jihadists. Wagner is operating here in a lawless space, using violence and intimidation to stabilize regimes that rely on Russian support. These videos are from Mali's border with Mauritania. Nearly 150,000 refugees are camped out there. Many say they fled not from Islamist militants, but from Wagner and the Malian army.
They abused the women and beat them. They fired shots nearby to scare us.
Wagner surprised us. They arrested our husbands and took them away. We haven't heard from them since.
At least 925 civilians were killed in attacks involving Wagner last year, according to the independent monitoring group ACLED. That's more than twice as many as were killed by Islamist militias. Wagner's attacks on civilians have increased over time. Is this Russia's way of safeguarding the military regimes?
So you mean, is Wagner so effective because they don't care at all about the lives of civilians? No, I think when you're dealing with local conflicts like these, there are always a lot of problems. Local people are faced with the decision, should they fight against the Islamist groups or work with them? So I think these clashes are inevitable.
But many independent sources confirm that Wagner mercenaries have increasingly been involved in atrocities.
There were the operations, the one in Mura, in which there were allegations that hundreds of particularly men of the Fula community had been rounded up, and there were extrajudicial killings, and these had been linked to both the Malian army and the Russian paramilitaries, which they denied.
We know that the Russians' way of fighting is quite different from what the French would do or other Western soldiers will do.
In Mali, the military regime has taken power and has Russia's support. But the security situation here, as in the entire region, has not improved. On the contrary, it's gotten worse. More than 2 million people have been displaced inside Burkina Faso. That's nearly 10% of the population. And more than half of them are children. A number of towns, like Djibo, for example, have been surrounded by Islamist militants for years. Only helicopters are able to deliver humanitarian aid. The unrest and displacement in the Sahel has repercussions far beyond the region. That, too, plays into Russia's hands.
Of course, Russia benefits if more migrants head to Europe, also driven by poverty. It strengthens the AfD in Germany and other right-wing parties in Europe, which are now also pro-Russia. My personal theory is that the Russians are thinking, if all this triggers more migration, that's in their interest too.
But people are not only fleeing from terror, Wagner mercenaries, and hunger. They're also running from their own country's armies.
One person trying to help the refugees is Binta Sidibé Gascon. The human rights activist has invited people to an event in Ivory Coast. She keeps close track of what's happening in her homeland, Burkina Faso, and monitors how the regime terrorizes its own people. With gatherings like this one, she wants to give hope to the people in West Africa.
Social cohesion is the foundation of our society. In a cohesive society, everyone feels valued and recognized, regardless of their origin, beliefs, or opinions.
Binta Sidibé Gascon was born in Burkina Faso, one of 12 siblings. She was adopted at a young age and grew up in a land that was still peaceful. Today, she lives in Paris. His siblings stayed in Burkina Faso. She says her older sister and nephew were both murdered by the army that should have been there to protect them.
They were executed by the Burkinabe army and the volunteer army. I'm only telling you this to say that there are hundreds of reports of people like my sister, hundreds of people who have been killed in this way. If we continue to let this happen, I would say that the international community is guilty of failing to assist an entire community that's in danger.
Burkina Faso does not send Russian mercenaries to fight Islamists on the front lines. Instead, the regime sends civilian volunteers, giving them just 14 days of training. Ethnic tensions frequently arise. The Fulani ethnic group are often attacked, falling under a blanket suspicion of working with the Islamist rebels. The government denies all responsibility.
Binta Sidibé Gascon and her family are also part of the Fulani community. For nearly 10 years, she's been fighting for greater protections for this group. She is one of the few who speaks openly. She has faced death threats for her work and is unable to return to her homeland.
The expansion of the volunteer army is a political move. After Ibrahim Traoré seized power, he pledged to recruit 50,000 fighters. Videos on social media are said to show these forces involved in the murder of dozens of civilians in March 2025. Analysis from Human Rights Watch confirms the reports.
We find a man who was himself part of Burkina Faso's volunteer army. We're meeting him at a secret location. He has fled to another country. He's risking his life by talking to us.
In our group, there were some who would kill innocent people just like that. Not terrorists, although we were supposed to be targeting them. And it wasn't just other volunteers, but also our superiors, the soldiers. If they came to a village on a mission and people ran away in fear, they'd just start shooting.
The former farmer spent nearly 5 years with the volunteer army. But he says the more civilians were recruited, the worse things became in his country.
Children who are 3, 4, or 5 years old today know nothing of normal civilization. When they see a car, they only think of terrorists. They were born in a time where every car they've ever seen has had armed men in it. It's gotten so bad, you go to sleep at night, and when you wake up in the morning, there are corpses lying in your village. You don't know if they were killed by the military, by the Islamists, or if they starved to death. People are eating leaves now because there's nothing else.
A few months ago, he decided to lay down his arms. Since then, he's been in hiding from the army and the Islamists.
You can think what you want of the French, but those in power now don't respect any rules. The French army at least respected human rights. They didn't just kill people without first making sure that they really were guilty. But more should have been done. It's like we brought someone into our country who had the means to save us, but he didn't really try.
Back to Ouagadougou. Cyclists have come from all over the world to compete in a race lasting several days. Things are looking up in Burkina Faso with the help of Russia. At least, that's the message being put out.
French. I know this is French.
Very few here get to see the many reports and images of atrocities going on elsewhere in the country. Traoré has blocked access to news websites and banned a lot of international media.
In Ivory Coast, Binta Sidi Begascon is heading to her next event. One thing in particular is bothering her.
As soon as you say the word Russian, everyone listens. But they should also listen when we talk about the plight of the people of the Sahel. Even before the Russians arrived, our own military was committing atrocities. Yes, it's important to talk about the Russians, but not only about them. We've been talking about these problems for more than a decade. Before, there was a lot less interest. But since the Russians have arrived, everyone's suddenly interested. That's sad.
What Binta says hits home. While international debate focuses on geopolitical powers, people living in the region have their own questions and concerns. How can millions of young people in the Sahel have a future that's not just weapons and killing?
The concern is not just the short-term concern about what's happening, it's also the fact that that is jeopardizing the future of entire generations in this region.
Which could in turn have repercussions for Europe. Niger is one of several transit countries for migrants heading to Europe. In 2024, Niger scrapped an EU-backed law targeting migrant traffickers. Since then, thousands have left Niger to head to Europe.
The Sahel region is on Europe's southern border. The area is constantly in crisis, and it's the most important transit region for refugees and migrants leaving Africa for Europe. What happens here will directly affect us in Europe.
Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso have joined forces to form the Alliance of Sahel States, a new geopolitical bloc whose goals include cutting ties with the West. France's President Macron, shown here symbolically as a corpse covered in a shroud. The three countries' military leaders are working together. They've already introduced a joint passport and have unveiled plans for a new currency and a joint military force. The military and political support of the Kremlin has boosted the state's self-confidence. French street names are being replaced with the names of African independence fighters and national heroes.
I do believe that at some point, if France and Europe show the willingness, we will return to relations that I hope will be more balanced, more stable, and more durable.
France has also had to leave its military bases in other countries, like here in Chad, as well as in Senegal and Ivory Coast.
It wasn't the West's responsibility to make everything stable in the region. These countries had their own role. France was not going to be there forever. They did have to leave. But there was a responsibility by these countries also to be in charge of their own security, in charge of their own stability. And that hasn't quite happened.
But what will happen to future generations if we journalists can no longer report and people are bombarded on all sides by propaganda? In the end, the main thing everyone wants is to live in peace. Benkoro Zangare and his family are no exception.
My Mali of the future is a clean Mali, where children are well educated and healthy, with universities that adapt to the needs of our country.
Is it an independent Mali?
Of course. It's independence that will lead us there.
But Islamist terror is continuing to spread right to the coasts of West Africa. And Russia stands ready with military equipment, advisors, and narratives that promise hope. For Moscow, operations in the Sahel have always been linked to Russia's own history, a matter of national interest.
How can I say it in French? In Russian, you say, protection of the motherland takes place on distant frontiers. That means when we're fighting a war on terror in Mali, we're doing it for Mali and our homeland.
When Moscow celebrated the 80th anniversary of victory in World War II, Vladimir Putin invited his international partners to attend. It was a show of military strength and new alliances.
Today we are united by a common goal, the fight against terror and extremism. We will continue to help your republic restore law and constitutional order.
Traoré began his speech not in French, but in Russian.
I wish you good health, Comrade President.
Russia is flexing its muscles and looking for allies. But for the countries of the Sahel region, an old question remains. Could the hope for self-determination lead to a new dependency?